I want to welcome all of you to Kokoro Conversations, where we delve into meaningful topics and have great conversations about them. I'm Rebekah Anderson.
And I'm Alex Lang.
And today we're going to be delving into a topic that's hard to talk about, but definitely impacts lots of people, and that is loneliness. So to get the ball rolling on talking about this, I wonder what has been one of the loneliest times in your life that you can remember?
So in my life personally, I think what sticks out, and I've been through several different lonely times in my life, but if we get rid of the teenage angst period and we kind of like move past that a little bit, I would say that probably when I was in my sophomore year of college. So what had happened was I'd gone to Rice, I was a swimmer there, and when I got to the end of my freshman year, they decided they were going to cut the team. So they were just going to yank all the funding because at the time, due to Title IX, they were really pushing towards equality with women's sports. So they had to have the same number of full ride scholarships for women as they do for men, which is a good thing. But in order to achieve that parity, what they ended up doing was cutting off some of the sports that weren't as popular. Sure. And I know it's hard to believe this, but swimming is not the most popular sport. So we get to the end of the year, and our assistant coach had kind of let it slip to us because we said, next year when we do this, he goes, oh yeah, if there's a next year. And that's when we realized, oh, it's all going down and it's going to go away. So I get to the end of freshman year, they cut our team, and they actually honored the scholarship for me for the rest of my time there, which wasn't much to begin with, but it was nice that they were willing to honor it. So that following year, I, of course, wanted to, I've told this story before, but I wanted to spend time with all these guys who I was with. Well, they're all getting ready. Most of these guys were getting ready for medical school. They didn't really want to spend time with me. I don't blame them, but I was really alone. I didn't have anything to do. And in college, of course, you tend to make your friend groups in those first few months when you're at college. So everybody had kind of created their friend groups. My friend group was with the swimmers. And therefore, once we disbanded, and I didn't have them anymore to spend my time with, I was really by myself. And so I tried to get into some other friend groups, but it was really hard. So I literally ended up creating my own charity when I was there. I literally took computers, recycled them, because I had so much time on my hands and I was so depressed that I actually decided I needed to leave. And that's what inspired me to apply to end up going over to Oxford, because I said, I have to get out of here. And I'd seen a movie about a kid who went to Oxford, and I thought maybe I could get in. So I gave it a shot, and that was when I went. But I will say that year, when I was the sophomore year of college, I look at it now and I say, oh my God, I was in the worst depression. I was just lonely all the time. Yeah. And I'm an introvert. I like to be alone. Mm-hmm. So it was odd to me for the first time in my life being alone, but then feeling like I was truly isolated.
Well, and it sounds like too that you put yourself out there, you realized, man, I don't want to be alone all the time. And your efforts to develop friendships were kind of not working in the way that you wanted them to. Absolutely. And that in and of itself, I mean, when I think about some of the worst swings and misses in life, it's when you're really putting effort in to try and foster connection and it doesn't pan out. That hurts.
Now I'm interested for you. Yeah. So what was the loneliest time in your life?
Right. Well, when I was thinking about it, there was a time that really sticks out, and I imagine it was a lonely time for a lot of people. And that was during the pandemic. But also really there was a period of time where I think a lot of people were coming out of being in restrictions and not being able to gather when I was still really stuck in loneliness. And so, during that time, it's March of 2020, and I was in grad school, and we had a reading week before midterms. So we're all sitting around a table eating in the dining hall where I was at school, and we all get an email that everything is canceled for the rest of the semester. And I was really close. I was in New Jersey, an hour away from Manhattan where the outbreak started. And funny enough, literally like the weekend before, I was in New York City, like seeing a Broadway show, staying in Washington Heights, which was very close to where the pandemic broke out. But the way that my school managed the spread, and New Jersey was very strict, I was living in campus housing and got moved into an apartment building where there were very strict rules. You are not allowed to gather with each other. You can gather with like 1 or 2 people, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to know, because I know that for me, and I found this to be true in the literature as well, is that it was physically painful in some ways to be alone. And I only mean that in the sense, I don't mean it in the sense like physical pain in the sense that like I was hurting in my muscles. Yeah. It was physically painful in the sense that there was this kind of dis-ease. The only way I could envision it is like a star collapsing. Like that's what it felt like. It felt like I was collapsing into myself, and that I had no real capacity to reach out. And it felt like even when I would try to explain to people what was happening, they weren't hearing me or listening or caring, for that matter.
Yeah, and I think that gets at something that was really unique about this period for me, which was I felt like in the circumstances I was facing in this relationship, which was, I was just, it's hard to describe really, to paint a picture, so to speak, of what it was like. But I was finding myself in a situation where I was feeling like there were a lot of issues. I was trying to talk about them, and I was hearing, at least from this other person, that a lot of what was happening was my fault and that I was failing to see certain things. And the way that felt was like, I'm bringing up things that feel like a problem. I'm hearing that I am the problem. And then I feel crazy, like completely crazy. And so I found myself in a place where I was like, well, this person is probably right. Like the way I'm seeing the world is probably an issue here. And I'm probably the only one that has this problem. And that was like the loneliest feeling I could have ever imagined, was I am the problem and there's no one who really understands. And so I just felt the world becoming more and more distant, and I felt myself feeling more and more lost, confused. And like you said, like, I think that's really a great way of describing it. You're like a star collapsing in on itself.
Yeah, well, and I think something that you say in there that really resonates with me within that is when you keep going up to people and then they walk away, or somebody tells you in your situation, oh, you're the problem. You're the one who's causing this issue. And then you start looking for evidence. Is this, maybe people really don't want to be friends with me. Maybe I'm not friendship material. And so then it becomes this kind of negative feedback loop to a degree, right? That ends up spiraling you downward into feel. And so then it becomes hard to even reach out, because at that point, you don't even feel like you can do that.
Exactly. When you think that there's something that's repelling other people away from you, which is, it sounds like how you felt. I think I felt that way in some ways. Like, people really had no desire to connect with me. That was like the belief that I had at that time. It really reinforces a false story that you have inside of like, am I not worth being friends with? Am I not worth investing time in? And that is like the loneliest place, to feel that you are not worthy of connecting with someone else, or that there is something that makes you the reason why someone would walk away.
Yeah, the narrative part of it is really interesting in loneliness as well, because I think that we construct worlds for ourselves where, in some ways, I hate to say this, but it's true, I think, for most of us, we construct a world where we are the center of our universes. And in some ways, I think we are all aware of our flaws, but we all want to believe, as the center of my own universe, that people enjoy being around me and like being with me, right? And I think everybody does that to some degree. There's a certain, it's a certain delusion, obviously, that we sell ourselves, because if you don't believe that, then how do you even function in life? If your immediate idea is, I'm not worth anything, which some people, they hold to that if they're going through serious depression, things like that, that holds to them. But, that narrative that we kind of tell ourselves, which is that, I'm okay as the center of my own universe.
Right.
And then when people are repellent from that,
right.
If you think about if we're going to continue on with the analogy of like a solar system and a star collapsing,
right.
if those planets, if there's nobody in your orbit, then you feel as though that you start to say, maybe that narrative I've been telling myself is wrong. And in some instances, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you need to tell yourself, I would assume that in your situation, when you started to question, so there's a narrative about yourself, there's a narrative you were being fed, and then there's a point at which you have to question both of those things.
Yes.
If you're going to change the situation. I think that's the question I would ask you is, when you were very, very lonely, how long did it take for you to end up questioning that fundamental narrative?
You're talking about this delusion of like, we're the center of our own world. And I think that the real root, hopefully, of that delusion, so to speak, is not so much that we're the center of our own world, but that we are worthy of love and belonging, connection and dignity, kindness and fair treatment. I mean, I really believe every person deserves that. And so where I found myself was an unfortunate place where I was like, gosh, like every time I'm trying to connect with people beyond this one person I'm in a relationship with, it feels like people don't really want to spend time with me. And maybe that's because there's a pandemic. Maybe it's because they're all kind of living in the center of their own worlds. They've got their friendships and their connections. But there was a real part of me that thought like, there's something fundamentally at fault here with me. And so when I was able to go back to work and do something that I felt like I was good at, and I was very fortunate at that time to work in an environment where I was around a lot of different kinds of people. And I found that people were not repelled by me, that people were very kind and wanted to
evidence to the contrary of the narrative.
Yes. There was evidence to the contrary of the narrative. And then fortunately, and this came over time, when I was willing to be a little bit more honest about what was going on, because I fall into a pattern of my own delusion, which is denial. Like, you've heard me say it a million times over the years. I'll be like, I'm fine, this is okay, everything is good, and any problems arising are probably because of me. I can think of so many times I've been like that throughout my life, and then I started to be a little bit more honest. The thing that really helped me a lot was so many people said to me, I've been exactly where you are. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I can just remember my experience like that. My story was, I love the supervisor I worked with at work during that time. Just one of my all-time favorite people I've ever known. And so much fun to work with, really helped me, and just a great person who's super understanding. And so I went up to her after I had kind of really come to terms with what I was dealing with. And I said, can I talk to you a little bit about what's going on? I just feel like there's some stuff I want to share. I sat down with her and she talked to me for probably 2 hours. And I can remember that I said to her, I just feel like I'm crazy. I've been so crazy. And she looked at me and she just said, Rebekah, you're the least crazy person I know. And it really helped me to I felt like a creature that was molting. I shed a layer of skin. And that's to me, when you experience loneliness, your face is down and you can't see anybody around you. But when someone else is able to come and say no, I know what you're going through. You're not alone. I've been lonely too. I've had people walk away from me when I was trying to connect. I've had people treat me poorly. And I thought maybe something was wrong with me, only to find that wasn't the case. It's you look up and you see oh my gosh, there are all these other people around me who get it. So
we're kind of getting to some of the root causes of where loneliness can start, how it can manifest. I think it raises an interesting question though, because the Surgeon General, or the one that was in office prior to this administration, made one of his primary goals talking about a loneliness epidemic that he was seeing. He had gone all around the United States, and he was finding that people were at some of the lowest points of connection ever in their lives. And he was seeing this across all demographic types. And this was very concerning to him. He brought it up as a national health concern. Why do you think that so many people right now are the loneliest they've ever been in the history of our country? I would think you could. It's hard to find another time where people feel so isolated.
Number one, I think that there is a misconception about what makes us feel like we're not lonely. The truth is, you can have 1 million people who you hang out with and still feel very lonely because the depth of your connection, not there. And so I can think about friendships that don't actually make me feel like that sense of togetherness.
Well, it's like when we talked about friendships a little while ago, where the depth of the friendship matters. And, I think that, and we talked about, this whole thing like with my mother, where she would look for different people to be different types of friends with her. So I think it's an interesting thing that you're bringing up, though, that the depth of friendship in this particular instance, when it comes to loneliness, really we're kind of getting back into this whole thing of, I know about you, I know what you're going through, and I take the time to ask you about that. Well, that right there vanquishes loneliness because somebody's been thinking about you.
Yeah.
Somebody cares about you. But if you're this level and you're just talking about whatever, right? That person may not care about you personally, right?
Yeah.
So I think you bring up an interesting point with that, which is to say that, the depth of relationship. So why do you think, though, that people are struggling with the depth issue?
But the way that our world works, it's like you spend so much time pouring into your work or to your child's different things that they have to do, their extracurricular activities. And you end up feeling so sucked dry a lot of the time that you don't have a lot of energy to invest in other people. People move around a lot more, so it can feel like, well, why am I going to invest in a relationship with somebody who could leave? But I think also we don't really know oftentimes how to make friends. And I think men are actually disproportionately affected by this. I took a class in graduate school where we talked about kind of the pressures specifically on men to appear like very stoic, very alone, like they don't need anybody to get through life, which is not true.
The Marlboro Man.
Exactly. We literally talked about the Marlboro Man, who was, by the way, I was living in New Jersey. He was literally a gay man who was found at a mall in New Jersey. He was just like walking by, and somebody from Marlboro saw him and said, "You need to be our cowboy." So he's this like symbol of rugged individualism who the actor, the model who displayed it, didn't even meet kind of the model of what they were supposed to be. Like perfect masculinity, rugged individualism, not needing anything. And that wasn't the case for the model. So very deceptive sort of thing.
We keep coming back and overlaying some of this with technology, because that, I think, is a big issue. Because, I think that you're probably on the very cusp, I'd say the very edge of the true technological revolution. Because, I think anybody who is probably born 2000 and after, let's just put it that way.
Sure.
Those are people who grew up, by the time they were coming into their own, 13, 14, smartphones existed at that point. And were more ubiquitous. They weren't, it wasn't impossible to get your hands on them, whereas in the mid-2000s, earlier it was. So by that point, they were more ubiquitous. So you're right before that, and so am I, where in order for us to make friends, we didn't have the technological hurdles to go through to do that. So today, though, when we're talking about people who are 2000 and above, so my sons would be an example of this, there is a huge worry that their capacity to create friendships via the natural mechanisms that we have established throughout history as human beings, being in proximity to one another, getting to know each other through social gatherings, which doesn't really seem to happen in the same way anymore. where you would just naturally go out and be with people. Now, I will say, and I want to say this as an aside, I'm watching my sons grow up, and that is coming back more in vogue now. I watch my sons, my older son in particular, he is constantly out with people. And I've actually been a little bit relieved to see that he is spending so much time with them. He still has his device, but it's not as pervasive. He knows that when he's with people, he wants to be with people. Do you see that the technological hurdles that are now in place, which just the idea of even going up and talking to people, I feel like now without figuring out who they are on social media ahead of time is almost seen as odd. How is that impacting their ability to have friendships? Because if you don't have that basic tool that you learn when you're young of the friction that occurs of, let's be friends. Oh, we're not going to be friends. Okay, well, then I'll find this group. And so you kind of find your people, which is what we naturally had to do growing up. How are you seeing that manifest now in a society where that friction doesn't exist in the same way that it used to and almost has been removed by that, where some people are growing up not having any friends at all to begin with? They're literally super isolated from the beginning. So I'm just interested to know your perspective on that.
Well, what I find to be the case is with young people, they're on their phones all the time, like just kind of scrolling mindlessly. So they're in two places at once almost. And what that means is that and this is totally just based on my personal experience, and I'd be interested, maybe let us know in the comments if you can, but I'm curious to know if this is the truth for others who work with a lot of younger people. But we're at a social gathering, and it's like a phone is almost a social lubricant. Like, I'm uncomfortable, so I can just pull out my phone. And so some of that conflict that you've talked about in like Kokoro Live episodes that are really, it can feel very uncomfortable in the moment, but it tends to produce really meaningful results to be able to go through a conflict and come out on the other side. You feel uncomfortable in a social interaction or in a moment. You're out in public, you're at the grocery store, or you're somewhere and you have nothing to do. You can pull out your phone and just start scrolling. And so what that means, I find, is that when I'm in an environment with young people that is very social or that's very active, they often are like on their phones scrolling while that's happening. And to tell them to put their phone away, it's darn near impossible. I actually, when I first started, I was like, you guys are adults. I trust you to do this. If I ask you on your phone to not be on your phone, I trust that you won't be. And I had to throw that out the window because it was not possible. Yeah. Like, they're taking photos of me while I'm talking. It was crazy to me. I was like, oh my God, I literally can't imagine trying to do that to like an adult authority figure when I was growing up. If I had done that with you, you would have taken my phone and thrown it against the wall.
True.
Ask me how
story.
I know. So all this is basically my way of saying, like, it's not, like, I found the same thing as you. Like, kids are willing to go out and be together, but they're not very present. Like, and what I think that means, we do something called highs and lows, where we go around a circle in a large group and we ask every kid to share a high and a low. So kids, they tend to start off like somewhat attentive. And then as we go around and we get to the final person, people are scrolling on their phones, they're talking to each other. And what that means is, like, I kind of have my speech I give every week. I'm like, I know that that's really tempting, but this time is for us to really get to know each other on a deep level, to like really hear what's happening in each other's lives. And ideally that'll enable us to, like, in another week or so, like, somebody shares that they had a really hard test and they're scared about what results they're going to get back. Next week we remember that because we were listening and we were paying attention, and we can come back and ask about that. But if you're distracted on your phone laughing,
you miss all that.
You miss all of it. Yeah. And I think it doesn't set people up to make those deep kinds of friendships.
Well, you're bringing up something really important with that, which is, I think that, we've been focusing just now on youth. But when it comes to people of all ages who are utilizing technology, the ever-present nature of it makes it feel, in some way, it's good in the sense that I know a lot of what's going on around the world the moment it happens. It's bad in the sense that I know what's going on around the world the moment it happens. So not only do you have the stuff in your life that you're dealing with, but now you're seeing how the world is collapsing in one area and you're worried about this. And so there's this constant anxiety that people are feeling as a result of this. And that information makes you feel in some ways more isolated than you did before. And it becomes this big feedback loop. So if you don't have the presence of mind to set it down, to push it away, and then on top of that, to engage with people in the world. In that episode of Kokoro, that was what you got to put it away. You have to physically shove it aside, and then you have to make an intentional effort to reach out. And then when you're with that person, you can't bring it back out again because you're not there, as you're pointing out. And so what's happening, what you're describing with the youth, which you have this ability because you're an adult, an authority figure, to tell them, put it away.
Right.
You can create environments for them to do that. Once you're an adult, it's on you. You have to do that. And I think that so many people have kind of been lulled into this sense of security with the phone. So I think that to the extent that we are in this kind of world now that rewards us being alone, and the reward is, I hate to say this, but the reward is that you feel the dopamine hits. That's the reward. That's not good for you, but that's the reward that you're getting out of it. And so it rewards the isolation. It rewards you to do that. You're benefiting companies that want you to do that.
Yeah.
You're benefiting a lot of people in that way. And they sell you, as you said, a lie.
They do.
They sell you a lie that actually you being on there is to your benefit and that this is good for you. And I'm not saying that you should just completely abandon it, although you can. I am saying, though, that you need to really make an effort to set that aside in your life. And so I think this leads us very naturally into the question of what are some of the strategies that can be employed to then reverse the effects? If you can recognize in yourself, I'm isolated and alone, what can you do to stop that, to change that, to move it in the other direction?
Sure. What's something I often turn to and do alone that I could seek out connection with other people to do? Sometimes that's exercise. Sometimes that is just going and trying something entirely new. We all have to eat. Sometimes it's like asking somebody to just do something like eating together, getting a cup of coffee, like things like that can help us to really seek out connections in ways that are easy. But I think the other thing that I would be remiss not to note is that if you've been very isolated and alone, stepping out and being around people for the first time.
It's really hard.
It's hard. I mean, you feel almost like, I felt this way after being isolated during the pandemic, and I found that a lot of people did. I was like, I mean, I'm typically a person who is good at conversing. I like to ask people how they're doing. It's like, gosh, like, what do I even say? I don't know. I felt like everything I said
you
was...
lost the skill in a sense because you were so, it's almost like the muscle atrophied to a degree. Not that it's not there, it's just atrophied. You haven't used it.
Yes, exactly. And so I think for anyone who's pretty isolated and alone, that's how it feels. It can feel like I am the most awkward person. I have no idea what to say. I have no idea what to do. And the truth is that sometimes people can be cruel, and they can give you a sense that, like, why are you talking to me?
Very judgmental.
Very judgmental. And I think that giving yourself the grace to just say, it's going to be awkward for a little while, but I'm going to keep going, that can be so helpful. And after a period of isolation, it can be hard to make friends, but it will only be that way for a short period of time, and to keep going and to really to understand that your choice to put yourself out there it's brave, it's courageous, and it's vulnerable.
And I think we also need to look at this from another angle. So if you're dealing with loneliness and it's as a result of things like depression or there's circumstances outside of your control, where you're feeling this. I think Simon Sinek said this in one of the, I saw him talk about something where he was saying that a friend of his had reached out to him during a really tough time. And it was, what she said was, hey, how are you doing? Or what's going on? Which was what she always says. There was no indication to him that anything was out of the ordinary and that she really needed that. And this woman who he's friends with, she had spent a lot of time delving into research about how just spending 8 minutes with a person, 8 minutes of listening to the needs of a person, that can make you feel so much better and heard and listened to. It's crazy that it's only 8 minutes, that's all you need. So they have a keyword or a phrase that they say to each other, hey, can I borrow your time for 8 minutes? Yeah. Can I just get 8 minutes of your time? And that was enough. And so that's the trigger, right? To say, oh, you need somebody, you feel lonely, you feel isolated. Right. I think that that's something that we refrain from often because we feel like, well, I don't want to, totally unload on somebody and let them know. Sometimes people need to know you're not in a good place. And if that person is a good friend to you, they'll hear that and say, oh, I didn't realize.
Yes.
I didn't know.
Yes. Well, and I love too that Simon Sinek, he notes, he's like, you can leave a meeting for 8 minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a very manageable, or even if you're in a meeting that you can't leave, you can say, I have 8 minutes in half an hour when my meeting is over. And it just, to even have somebody who on the other side of that reach would be willing to do that, that means everything.
I think a lot of people have people like that in their lives who they can turn to, but they maybe haven't. But then we get into that category of people who maybe don't have that at all.
Right.
And I think that's much harder. That gets back to your to the issue that you're seeing or you're dealing with, where maybe you haven't really developed the skill in the same way. And this is something that I will tell you, I was working on a business for a while where I was trying to create opportunity for people to get together. And what I noticed out of that business was that a lot of people who did it were already people who were super social. That I created it for the people who weren't social, and yet it was the people who were very social who engaged in it. And so it wasn't really serving the purpose I was going for. And that made me realize, to get these people who are struggling to find friendship, the people who really need the help, to get them out of the house, to get them going, there's a lot more involved in that than just, hey, there's an opportunity, come. If that was the case, then they would do it.
Yes.
So I'm interested to know, what do you think if you're stuck in that kind of place where you're feeling lonely, you're feeling isolated, you feel like maybe people don't care about me or they don't see me? What's another way that you might go about changing that?
I think the challenge sometimes comes with what we talked about earlier. There is a part of us when we feel that isolated, when we've struggled with making relationships and friendships for a long time, where we start to ask, am I worthy?
Yeah.
Am I capable at all? And the truth is, our connection to others is often only as strong and deep as our connection is with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's very hard. And so I do think that sometimes the platform that has to be built or reinforced and strengthened is that we really do have to pour into ourselves. And the unfortunate part of that is often it's hard to pour into ourselves when we don't have a support network to offer us that support. And so starting small, doing something that helps you connect with yourself, something that makes you feel a childlike joy, something that is just plain fun to do. Finding something that helps us to feel filled up, I think helps us to build a stronger sense of self-love and self-care that allows us to be better when we connect to and reach out to others. And it helps us to know that we are worthy. And knowing that we are worthy, knowing that we belong, or even building the resilience to kind of get back up when we feel knocked down and we start to question that, I think it only benefits our ability to reach out and to kind of grow, to rise after we fall again and again.
I think that's sage advice.
Thank you.
Yeah. And ultimately, I would say, I think that you have to shift the narrative in your own life. which is hard to do. I mean, ultimately what we're talking about when you're talking about self-care is a need to shift that narrative of whatever it is you're telling yourself, particularly about your worth and your ability to be friendship material, or the fact that you might feel that nobody sees you. All of those things come and like it's a tide in a way. And that if you believe that narrative, there's not going to be people around. But if you can change that narrative, then you will find people in your orbit. Because this is why being in person matters so much. People respond to those in their orbit. And if you're a person who's working on yourself and you're telling yourself, I am worthy of these things, then people will see you as worthy. But if you tell yourself, if you believe internally, I am not worthy of this, then people aren't going to say that you're worth their time.
Right. So I think what you're noting here is that we all tell ourselves stories about our lives all the time. And the truth is that those stories, the ones that we tell ourselves, we do have the ability to change them and to make them different and decide what is the story that I'd like my life to tell. And loneliness does not have to be the narrative, the story that our lives follow. So I want to thank all of you so much for joining us today. It's been really enjoyable to delve into this hard topic. So hopefully you'll join us again next week.
Looking forward to it. Bye.